I'm here with Arvid, the author of Zero to Sold, a fantastic book about bootstrapping. How are you doing, Arvid?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
You self-published. This was your first book. Last I looked, it's got perfect five-star ratings. You obviously did something right. Was it what you expected?
The great thing is that I didn't really have many expectations. It kind of felt like a journey of discovery, much more of a journey of reaching a goal. I really knew I wanted to share my knowledge. I didn't necessarily know that it was going to be a book. It just kind of crystallized into that shape. I started with a number of, not even blog posts, just titles, just what I would like to talk about. And they were kind of in my mind, but not on the page just yet. I had all these ideas, the things that I wanted to talk about. After a while, I had like 250 something titles that I would have wanted to talk about. I've written articles or chapters for maybe half of them. There's still so much I wanted to talk about, and I still want to. I kind of set the stage, set the outline of the whole thing, not necessarily the book, but like everything I wanted to talk about in the beginning. And then I gradually filled it, gradually made it happen. I guess the typical bootstrapping manner, I just kind of winged it most of the time, right? You build a business, you build a book. Honestly, in retrospect, that I figured out is that there's very little difference between building any business that is a technical business and writing a book. They kind of all are the same because you need an audience that is interested in what you're doing. You need a problem that you're solving. You need a solution that actually fits with your audience. And then you need a product that implements that solution. And that's all there is, right? It doesn't really make any difference.
The way you describe it, designing the books as a product, that's exactly how I think about it. It's not a customer segment, it's a reader profile. It's not necessarily a value proposition, although it kind of is, but I think of it as like the promise on the cover of the book. Like, what's this book going to do for me? And it could be help me understand this slice of history, or it could be help me make this important decision in my life. Yeah. There's so many different promises that a book can make. And I think sufficiently famous authors get the advantage if they don't have to do that extra step. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger can be, hey, here's my story. And people, they'll figure out what the value is for them. Whereas if you're a new author, to get noticed, you need to go that extra step and say for the reader, hey, here's what this is going to do for you. I'm making you a promise on the cover, and I've done my damnedest to follow through on that and make sure the book delivers. People hate this because making the decision about who you're serving, that's not what you're focused on. What you're feeling in your heart is all the people you're leaving out and all the topics you're deleting and all the features you aren't building. And that's very painful for people to leave those possibilities on the table. Was it easy for you? Because it's very clear to me when I'm reading your book who you had in mind that you were writing to. And that gives it a consistency and a power from start to finish.
So today I was checking my Amazon reviews for the book. And you said it has had 5-star reviews all over the place. Today I got my first 1-star review. It was a person that just didn't find what she wanted to find in the book. So I got my first 1-star review. And I thought to myself, this sucks. Like, no author wants to have a 1-star review on Amazon. But then I looked at the 40 5-star reviews and I thought, yeah, these people are the people that I actually wrote it for. And I'm saying this because I've always been a big fan of Seth Godin, and he always talks about the people that don't like your product. Well, they are not your customers. It's perfectly fine to limit yourself to an audience that is very specific and that you want to serve completely, but it doesn't have to be everybody. Like, if it is everybody you're trying to serve, you serve nobody. It's perfectly fine that other people will not be part of this audience and hence not like your product. Crichton didn't write Jurassic Park for the people who don't like Jurassic Park. That's right. It just doesn't work that way. There are thousands, if not millions, of others out there who will understand it.
Seth Godin also, you mentioned, he talks about what does a 1-star review mean? It means like, well, the wrong person read it. Like, someone read it and it's not the book for them. Obviously, if it's all 1-star reviews, you have a problem. I got my first 1-star review. I remember exactly when it happened. It was right after we'd started doing advertising for the book. And I was following the numbers and I was like, I can target these adjacent communities and I increase the profit. And each time we added an extra community, an extra set of keywords, I'd watch my numbers go up. And then I watched my star rating go down, It didn't go down by a lot because I had a lot of reviews by that point, but it was like, it hurt me, right? Each of those 1-stars was like, and I realized like, I'd gotten a bit ahead of myself and I was trying to advertise in a way which forgot who the book was originally trying to serve. And so I'd put it in front of people it wasn't for and kind of convince them to buy it. And so, of course, they were disappointed because, it wasn't what they needed.
It's kind of hard to change your book. So the problem here is that if you don't choose an audience that's big enough from the beginning where you could fulfill your goals that you want as an author, either through sales or the reach or whatever you have. If you don't know where the audience is and that they exist, if you haven't validated that these people actually are out there, then you might run into this problem. Then you need to diversify, and then you kind of pull down the quality of the book because it just doesn't fit these adjacent audiences anymore. What I write about in Zero to Sold, one of my main messages, and also very likely the theme of my next book, is you need to start with this audience, right? You need to figure out who your potential buyers, your customers, and all the people that might even be interested in your book are, and if they exist. The audience I was writing for, essentially with two audiences. One was real and the other one was imaginary. The real one was other founders out there who wanted to build a business, wanted to build a bootstrap business. The imaginary one was me 5 years ago. That was my actual audience, right? Because I knew exactly what I didn't know when I started all of this stuff. And writing for yourself is surprisingly easy because you just know how you would like to talk to yourself. The word audience is highly ill-defined in many circles. So I'm just want to say what it is to me. An audience to me is the amount of people who should be interested in what you have to offer, right? And you need to really make sure that this group exists, that these people could potentially be your following or be your customers or buy your book in the future. The audience validation part is the first and most important step, I think, in any business attempt. And writing a book is clearly a business attempt. Audience exploration and validation is the first and maybe the most important step in all of this.
Even if your reason for writing is to leave a legacy or to have an impact, like people still need to read it, and they need to want it, and they need to talk about it in order for those goals to be accomplished. Although celebrities, as always, are the exception, and they can kind of do what they want.
If you have an audience that is already engaging with you on content, wouldn't you ask them what they need? Wouldn't you ask them what their biggest problems are? Wouldn't you ask them what they would be looking for in the best product you could build? You have to do the exact same thing as an author because you can't change your book after the fact. So you talk to them and you figure out, okay, these seem to be the critical problems. These seem to be the solutions that these people actually would like. Well, do they, right? Before you do all this upfront work, you need to make sure that it's actually worth it and not just people liking you and wanting you to succeed. Because there's a difference between you succeeding and people wanting you to succeed, right?
Yeah, I've been using teaching as almost like the prototype for the book. And like before the mom test, I spent a lot of time mentoring and talking to other founders. I was teaching them the whole like early stage startup stack, lean startup, business models, the whole kit and caboodle. The reason that I ended up writing the book about the mom test is because it's something I stumbled across where I felt like I'd found a way to teach it that hadn't already been said. And it seemed to be both desirable and effective. And I was like, And so then later when I was bored enough, I had a week to kill and no internet. I was like, okay, I'll write a first draft. But by that point, I already knew it worked. I already knew that, people wanted it and all of that. And it made me very confident in the writing process. I didn't feel the imposter syndrome with that book at all because I knew that the particular slice I was writing about really worked and really mattered.
I completely agree. And I think that's what I've been doing too. Like with the blog and with the articles, every single week I was talking about some subject and people were coming back to me with their criticism, with their responses, with their agreement sometimes and disagreement other times, right? There was a lot of conversation, particularly in the beginning, and that shaped my understanding of how my audience thought about stuff. Like how they would like to be presented with information. I mean, the content, again, was what I had already went through in building the business, right? I don't just like philosophize. It's actually something that I've done before. But there's another layer, and I think teaching is that layer. Once you tell people how to do something, they do it and it actually works. That is another level of validation.
I loved what you said earlier about how there's this big front-loaded piece of work when you actually write the draft, and even more so when you're editing it and whipping the words into shape and all of it. It just takes so much time. Like I was reading a case study about the startup of you, the one by Ben Kasnocha and Reid Hoffman, and they wrote it in a very traditional way, right? Like they worked hard. They're both very smart people. They had all the expertise. They wrote it. They had it edited. They had it proofread. And then following the publishing industry's traditional approach, they sent it out to review readers. And they realized that it was just completely wrong. It didn't work. Like I don't know if it suffered from the expert problem or the knowledge didn't cross the air gap or they used the wrong, whatever it was. For whatever reason, it didn't work. And Ben wrote this great postmortem. And in it, he said, so we learned that we were wrong, but we didn't know how to make it right. And his conclusion was just like, so we were going to miss our launch deadline. And they ended up having to spend another 6 months overhauling the whole thing and essentially rewriting the book because they'd already done all the hard work. So as much as possible, I try to delay the editing for as long as humanly possible because it's much faster to iterate a conversation than to iterate a manuscript. I think I wrote 5 other books that I never published because I essentially fell into the trap of writing something before I was sure that it worked. And then I spent months on a manuscript. And then when I started my beta reading, I was like, wait, this is wrong, or this doesn't actually work. And I was like, oh, that was wasted effort. It was like you build the whole product perfectly, and then you realize, whoops, I built the wrong thing. Something I love about your approach to doing it with the blogging and the newsletter and the tweeting and kind of writing it in public and sharing those thoughts as you work through it is that it lets you catch those mistakes much sooner before you've piled up the full manuscript. It does prevent you from making those, month wasting mistakes, which I kept falling into, where I wrote the whole thing in secret like an idiot.
You wanted to actually share something meaningful with people. You just went about it in a way that didn't allow you to have any kind of validation. And that's the one thing that either you get it early or you have to risk not getting it at all at the end. So you should try to invalidate it as quickly as possible in the beginning, rather than building the thing, starting to publish it and having 0 sales.
I love having beta readers so much. I'm very aggressive with how early I try to involve beta readers now. I try to each week get a couple extra in. I'm just always looking, not every week, because sometimes you're just tearing up the whole thing and restructuring it and it's not practical to bring new people in, but it's so motivating, right? And it's so it's such a sanity check also. And I love watching where they get bored. I try to bring in strangers who don't owe me a favor and who don't like me. And who just want what the book is promising. Because then you watch and it's whoops, no one is reaching chapter 2, or no one's even opening the manuscript, or I can't even get someone to agree to try to open the manuscript. It's very nice, very pure validation, right? Because if no one will read it for free when it's a little bit broken, are they really going to buy it later? It really feels like, having done startups and business for a while and then paying attention to books as products, I really feel books, the development of books is where startups were right around 2000. We just haven't 100%. Modernized. And there's people like you who have the experience at startups. And so you naturally approach books in the same way. But I'm really excited to see the benefit when more authors realize how much better this can make their books and how much easier it can make their lives.
If you do this before you start writing, this initial exploration of people's problems and perspective even will give you this guideline into what you can and should be talking about.
Something I did with the one I'm working on now and I'm going to do with all my future books is I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book to help authors, nonfiction authors, right? And then I just started pinging people who I knew were thinking about a book or had mentioned one day I'd love to write a book, or, I knew there, and I was just like, hey, do you have questions? I know about this. Let me just talk to you and answer all your questions. And then I just watched for where they got excited and where they got frustrated and what they asked me. And actually those conversations kind of became my original table of contents. They told me what was in and out, because there's so many things I could say, but what's the bit that's actually exciting and valuable? And it's never obvious to me. I'm always surprised how badly I can predict what readers are going to value. I'd rather write a book without a computer than without being able to talk to my readers.
Oh yeah. I mean, my handwriting is horrible, but I would probably do the same. Because the moment you know what people need, you will find a way to make it happen. Technology just allows you to do it quicker, but you could do it by writing your manuscript by hand. Would be hilarious.
I've still got the handwritten first draft of the mom test, which I did in the Bavarian mountains. I'll give it to someone at some point as a prize for something or other. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a 10th anniversary contest and someone can get the first draft.
My goal is to front load as much knowledge and as much teaching as I possibly can, right? Which is the opposite of a novel. You, particularly in our case, where we create knowledge and try to communicate it as pragmatically and as dense as possible. It's so densely packed with information that if you were to make it a bigger book for more readership or anything like that, you would just add more fluff and it would be pointless. I think the introduction to the book and the first chapter was one of the last things that I wrote. Obviously, because how can you talk about your nonfiction book when it's not already there? How can you talk about something that does not exist? That doesn't have to be a start with the beginning and end with the end kind of thing. It can be anywhere in between, and doing it in a way where other people can look into it and tell you if you're going into the right direction or not. My lack of perfectionism works for me here, I think, because I really don't think stuff needs to be perfect. It just needs to be perfect enough. And if somebody reads an article of mine and shares it on Twitter, that is perfect enough, right? It could be better. It could obviously be much better. There could be like pictures in there, and I could go on a tangent here or less on a tangent there, but it doesn't matter. The thing that's out there is what's out there. And it's the same with my book.
Something that I think is a big lingering misconception about books is that it's all about the prose, or that, a single typo will cause your readers to mistrust you and all of this. I can't even tell you how many typos the mom test launched with. I mean, it's been out for 7 years now. A reader sent me a helpful message the other day, and he's like, here are the 42 typos I found. And I'm like, oh man, that's after like that's after the 7th update. I've still got 42 typos.
Awesome.
Sometimes literary types will give me trouble about it. They'll say, it's so sloppy, it's so unprofessional. And it's like, yeah, but like my royalties are crushing yours, like you're still working a day job. And it's because if someone's reading literature, the prose is a core part of the value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas if they're reading a problem-solving book, which is promising to do something, like I wouldn't have cared if zero, like I didn't see any typos in Zero to Sold. So you did a good job with the editing and the proofing.
Thank you.
But it could have been full of them and it wouldn't have bothered me, right? Because they're irrelevant to the value as long as they're not obscuring the message. And so I think there's still, there's a lot of hangovers from literature and fiction. I'm not saying you should be sloppy or take the piss or disregard the experience of your readers or anything like that.
Right.
But I definitely see authors, especially first-time authors. You actually have a section on this in your book about imagined responsibilities, all the things we think we have to worry about that we get hung up when we're starting a business. And certainly perfect, beautiful prose, I think, is one of the biggest things I see people get hung up on.
I told you in the beginning about these 30, 50, 100 titles. I would turn each of those into a Notion page, and then I would outline what I wanted to say, really just with little thoughts, not even sentences. And then at some point, I would turn each of these outlines into a paragraph or two, depending on how much I wanted to talk about it. And then I would end up with an article. And that would be my article. And maybe I would add an introduction, or maybe I would give like a little nice sign off at the end, right? But that would be it. I'm not trying to like engulf them in the splendor of my wordsmithing. Like I don't care about these things, right? It's not that it matters to me that people think I'm a good writer. What I would like them to think is that what I tell them is useful and actionable. And I did three things. First, I ran all of it through Grammarly, the tool. Every single article went in there. I went through this like 5 minutes, super tedious tasks of just clicking at the suggestion and either taking it or not taking it. And then I sent it to the copy editor. That came back with 3,500 revisions. I fixed those. Then I sent that to the proofreader. That came back with 3,000 revisions. Then I fixed those. And then I actually published a book. I spent like, I don't know, $100 on Grammarly and maybe 700, 600 something on the copy editor and the proofreader. And that gave it this baseline quality that at this point in Zero to Sold, within the first 3 days, I found 2 typos. And then 5 days later, I found the 3rd typo. And that has been it until now. I just worked on the absence of mistakes. Right? Just remove the flaws, but don't embellish. You don't need that. Right?
Yeah, I get sucked into it every now and then. I can't resist, but yeah, I know it's like a total time sink with very limited dividends.
But it's also fun. It's fun. You cannot tell me it's not fun to like get to like do the wordsmithing part, like the actual craft. I see this too, not just in building businesses. Like people stop like in the middle of doing it because they feel imposter syndrome, they feel perfectionism. And I feel the same way about books. Like people start with a draft and they write a couple chapters and then they feel, I'm not an author, I don't know how to do this. Well, just continue, do the thing and put it out there. People will read it and you'll become better. Like you don't have to be perfect from the beginning. I think by building in public, writing in public, and failing in public, you're learning in public, you're teaching in public, and you're succeeding in public eventually. They follow you because you produce reliable value and you produce that in your communication. An audience is a group of people who can see you, right? If you are a recluse, if you write a book completely in the shadows, nobody knows who you are, well, then you have a problem. Then you need to either attach yourself to some other kind of expert and have them lift you up, recommend you, or you have to pay a lot of money to be put in front of a lot of eyeballs. But reputation is something you need to physically earn, right? It's something you need to consistently spend time on. And for myself, I've been doing this, like I said, once I sold the business, we did 2 things. For the first thing that Danielle and I did was we went to MicroConf Europe, the conference in the bootstrapping space, and we signed up to give an audience talk, just 12 minutes, talk about what we did, how we sold the business. It's on the Bootstrap Founder blog. You can find it on the About page. I think it's the only talk I ever gave at a conference. It is immediately established us as some level of expert in the field. We had done something, and now we talked about it. And now it was out there. Now there was a record of us, public record of us talking about this. And then I started the blog. I consistently wrote articles every single week. I pushed them out there. People started following it, retweeting it, building this kind of community over time. I started with 400 followers that I had accumulated over the last 10 years on Twitter. I am just shy of like 8,300 at this point. Just really slowly growing an audience by not promising too much, but just really delivering value without asking for much in return.
Let's talk brass tacks there. One thing I find fascinating is we're both hovering somewhere around 10,000 Twitter followers now, like not zero, but certainly not a big Twitter deal. But your audience seems much more powerful is the wrong word, but much more activated than mine. I feel like I've built a very diluted audience by doing it unintentionally and by being quite passive. People drift in, they hear about me and they go, oh, that's interesting. I'll follow that guy. Whereas yours, I was really startled by how successful your launch was. Within the first couple of weeks, you'd already passed 20,000 in royalties. You hustled the launch pretty well. You went on kind of the digital book tour. And now it seems like the sales have stabilized and they're kind of growing through word of mouth and a bit more organically now. But what was fascinating about it is that you built that audience, as you said, essentially from scratch in a year. You went from 400 followers to, enough to launch a book and have this successful launch. Enough to get noticed, get on the digital book tour, do all this stuff. If you were starting from scratch, or let's say you were switching into a brand new industry where you knew no one for, which is what I'm going through. I'm going, wow, what do I do? I'm like, I feel busy. I feel overwhelmed. Like it's hard work to work on the book. It's emotional work. I'm a bit introverted. I don't necessarily love like going out and spending extra time talking to people, even on the internet. Like if you made it into brass tacks, like what would you suggest to someone to kind of get the like Pareto principle benefits of building an author platform or by writing in public? Like, what are you doing alongside? What's your weekly tempo or your daily tempo?
Right. Well, the most important thing that I have come to understand is consistency. So I posted a blog post every week. People apparently like consistently reading about small, almost highly diverse topics in a large field. So I wrote this blog post on customer service. Next week, I wrote one on product discovery. Next week, I wrote something on, audience validation. It just went all over the place, but I delivered a blog post every single week. I put it into a newsletter as well. Like to me, in the beginning, I started just with a blog post. And then at some point I noticed, I'm a very lazy person. I need to deal with this. And then I said, well, if I have a newsletter, then I need to write something every single week. So I started the newsletter kind of as an accountability scheme for myself. And then I figured out, well, now I'm reaching a lot of people, but there's still some people out there who would probably like to consume my content, but can't. And people talk to me, I cannot read, I don't have the time, I need this in audio or I'm not going to have it at all. So I started a podcast, same content, article, or if you're writing a book, chapter, right? Doesn't matter. Newsletter, same content, maybe a bit more. Podcast, same content, and then I kind of freestyle like for 10 more minutes after I read my own article into this microphone, right? And so I use the same content for 3 different media, even though they're almost the same. It gives you the opportunity to reach almost every person in your audience. Getting back to what you asked, you can write your book in public, like chapter by chapter or like section by section, however you write it, and just continuously release these things to an ever-growing audience of people. Nobody will compile this into a book and release it for you. And reliably, consistently publishing your content every single week, that will build an audience whether you like it or not, because people will tell other people about stuff they find interesting. On the other hand, and that's my second part here, I am very, very actively amplifying voices in my community. Whenever I see somebody, some founder, some bootstrap founder or a VC-backed founder, doesn't matter to me, having some level of success and sharing that, I share that. Because there's nothing nicer than being recognized as somebody who has success in a complicated field such as entrepreneurial activity. And that attracts people as well. If you do that, and if you do that consistently, that gets people in that do that too, to you.
And that takes zero effort. I
Oh.
think also it really creates the evangelists and the fans. For the mom test, I actively sold the first 500 copies. And then after that, I kind of did nothing. And the way I sold those, or the copies even, was because there were individual people who knew me and trusted me. And they gave me an opportunity. For example, at a small event, I was able to, give 200 copies to the right people. And that was so useful. Because otherwise, like if you're literally starting from scratch, it takes a long time. You can do it. We did it for Workshop Survival completely from scratch, just through advertising, because we were so burned out, but it was much slower. It took a lot longer to get that initial seed audience. The criticism, or the more like the complaint or the objection to building an author platform at all, is that it feels like an extra job for people who are already incredibly busy. Like most of us aren't full-time authors. We're doing other stuff also, building businesses, working jobs, hanging out with our dog, whatever. What would you say like the necessary time cost is in order to get something functional, to get kind of the 80-20 benefit of building an author platform? How would you quantify it?
First off, the most important thing, thank God there's tools to do most of this for you. That's one of the most important parts when it comes to engaging with the community. You don't need to sit in front of your computer, and my example would be Twitter, and be on Twitter for 8 hours a day to reach people 8 hours a day. There's scheduling tools, there's engagement tools out there. I personally use Hype Fury, a tool that is really nice, where I can schedule both my tweets that I want to write myself and the retweets and the quote retweets of stuff that I found interesting. And here's the example. So the last week, I spent at the lake with Danielle, and we had digital detox. Like we did nothing on our computers. I didn't look at Twitter, I think, for 4 days straight. But I think I tweeted and retweeted around 80 times during those 4 days.
Wow.
Because I had spent, I think, a whole day leading up to a trip, figuring out what I was going to talk about this week, drafted my tweets. I figured out here are really cool things that happened last week that I would like to amplify next week. Tweeting out my podcast, tweeting out my newsletter, talking about what I was going to talk about, amplifying some of my own stuff. All of this in advance. Everything can be automated, and you just need to get used to doing this. It doesn't feel very empathetic to write a tweet and schedule it for next Friday. It's not very immediate, but it is for the people who will read it. People still engage with tweets that are scheduled just the same way they engage with tweets that you just randomly put in there during the day. And the great thing is, if you are asleep during the prime time for your audience, and you don't need to spend much more than maybe 10 minutes a day scheduling interesting things that you found. Nobody will take any offense to you retweeting something that was tweeted yesterday, or to you replying to a tweet from a couple days ago. People either don't notice, then they don't care, and the content counts, right? If it's a great tweet from a week ago, it's a great tweet today. So might just as well. You don't need to be there the whole time, but you can set it up so that it's still coming from the heart. It's still what you want to say, and it still does what you want, either amplify other voices or amplify your own content. That's the stuff that does not exist in the traditional book market, right? In the traditional publishing, you write, you publish, and then you write some more, or you publish some more, or whatever. But this consistent interaction with a group of people who consume your content, who you help by producing this content, that is the value of your brand. And that is why you are important to them.
What I did with Mom Test is I put at the top of every page is my Twitter name. And I thought that was a bit silly, but I'm like, whatever, it's my book. I'll do what I want. And at the front and the back is my email address. And I noticed you did the same. You put your email at the back, which is really cool. And people email me every now and then and ask questions. And yeah, sometime around the time the lockdown started, I was no longer teaching in person. I wasn't going to give any talks. I was like, but I still like it. I like to occasionally talk or lecture or whatever. So I just started answering the reader questions with a video instead of an email. And I was like, okay, well, I've just turned an activity I was going to do anyway. It takes me the same amount of time. And now it's a piece of content. And I started, I don't know, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And like my YouTube channel is still fewer than 500 subscribers, but it's fun for me. And I can see how this is the start. And I'm like, wow, if I had started doing this 6 years ago when I launched the book, or 8 years ago while I was writing the book, instead of, X years later, I would have been done. Like that would have been my author platform done automatically with zero time drain. I really like YouTube. I don't have fun on Twitter. And so I think for me, a big part of it is like, yeah, it's like find the platform that suits your style and your preferences,
Yes,
and find a way to
absolutely.
drive down the time cost. It sounds like you've found a way to make Twitter very time efficient. Whereas for me, it's an absolute black hole of lost hours.
That makes a lot of sense. What YouTube is to you, Twitter is to me. Like, I really like diving in there and getting into a conversation and replying to somebody or retweeting something or scheduling something for later, knowing that I'm going to be in my bed reading my book and I'm still going to be tweeting. You know, it's just kind of, it's still enjoyable for me. And that's the main point. Because if YouTube is enjoyable for you, then this is something you can do for years. This is something
Exactly.
you can do on a schedule and it's not going to annoy you, right? Just like writing. I think writing is also something you enjoy. And if you can amplify and structurally stabilize this relationship with your customers and your potential readers or your potential fans out there, just being a real person, smiling, communicating, you know, just being there, then people will relate to you like they would relate to nobody else. And this is your brand. This is the essence of your brand. That's the essence of who you are. And that's why people buy from you eventually, why they trust you, why they give you the benefit of the doubt when they are alpha or beta readers and they see this kind of draft that doesn't make sense to them. And then they write you this nicely worded, but still furious email, you know, about how this is really not good and they would have hoped better, but let's try to salvage this. Like, if you get to that point, you don't get there because these people like you for no reason. They like you because you've built a relationship with them. You've given without asking much. And then at some point, they have, I assume at least, they have just stored up so much reciprocal need to reciprocate that when I put this link out there to my website for the book, they just jumped on it, right? And I sold like 350 copies within the first 24 hours because somebody really wanted to give back for all the stuff I had already given them. Yeah. I think that's a pretty solid approach to build an audience.
The problem of the business model is there's like, it takes a year to make the book or however long. It's like a year before you start getting paid. I meet so many people who want to put everything into one book. It's going to make it slower to launch. It's going to make it more expensive and costly to edit and refine and perfect and structure and print. Yeah. And then it's still going to sell for like the same $12 or whatever.
I don't know if this is going to change in the future. If you look at Kindle and how Kindle books can also be monetized, if you put them into Kindle Unlimited, you kind of get money by the amount of pages that people read. Then all of a sudden, long books make you more money than really concise nonfiction books.
There's a business model that fiction authors use where they've realized that a series of books has a fundamentally different business model dynamic than an individual book, because what you can do is you can give the first book away for free, or you can bundle it with other authors. So someone, when they buy the final book of a different author's series, they get the first book of your series for free and vice versa. And that essentially becomes the freemium or the free trial to lead people into the rest of the series. And if they read and like the first book, they're not price sensitive to the rest of the series anymore. And you can't get away with that with a single book. So essentially, they're using the series with the free or the heavily discounted or cross-bundled first title as the way to essentially build their author platform, right? Like they do it all directly through Amazon. It's a very interesting model. And some of the people who have focused on it, they go so far as to say, don't release any of them until you've written 3 of them. Because the business model just completely changes once you have the third. And people will say often your first book is your worst because you're still learning the craft, etc. And so they'll say, get rid of the first book, start at the second. You know, it's like, what? There's all these counterintuitive lessons that are coming. We haven't really seen that applied to nonfiction yet, but I'm sure there's the potential, as you say, in the future, and especially if Amazon changes the way the payments work.
And more people, and that's not just in authors, but also in people who understand themselves to be self-employed, they see the work that they're doing in teaching, in writing, that is actually a potential source of income, right? And you know it, like you said, your royalties pay for you and your life. That is a goal that can be reached by just working diligently and writing about stuff that people care about, like solving other people's problems through a book or through other means of teaching. So it's really not unfathomable anymore. Like, you don't have to become Michael Crichton. I'm going with Jurassic Park. I just love this stuff to be a successful author. Like, it's definitely not required that you write the next big best-selling novel. you can write something in your industry and make a killing and actually provide meaningful value. I see more and more people understanding that this is a business. Like they've written a novel, they have something cool, and now they're thinking about, okay, do I need an author page? How does SEO work? How do I do marketing? How do I get like paid advertising on Amazon going? Does this help? What is with paid reviews? Is that dangerous? Like people are starting to understand that there is a business surrounding writing and that they are business people in that field. Even though they've just written a nice kids book or something, still business.
Yeah, there's also though there's unfortunately still a lot of there's a lot of vultures in the industry, and there's a lot of let's say services that prey on dreams, like, because I think one of the root causes that allows the vultures is that people write whatever book they want to write, and then they try to figure out how to sell it. But as we know from business, like you got to start thinking, and as you always say, it's like you want to validate it. Is the audience there? Can you build the audience? You want to think about that at the beginning because it's going to affect your choices around the product design, like what's in versus what's out. What's the scope? What do I cover? What tone do I take? Am I speaking to experts or amateurs? All of these are product decisions. You can't just slap a clever marketing campaign on whatever you happen to have built. You kind of need to weave the marketability through the whole product. And so my hope, I definitely have also seen what you've seen. People are trying to figure out, how do I treat this like a business? But often they've built the wrong product. And so I hope that people will start asking those questions at the beginning of the process. And like, it's not about becoming a sellout or writing something just for the cash, but it's like, what's the intersection between the things you care about and the things that can also achieve the goals that you want? Because it's cool. When the whole lockdown hit, I was in Barcelona with my girlfriend and my dog, and we were able to just be like, actually, let's just move to the mountains, and like we brought our income with us, right? Because the income is books. And it was like, what a tremendous piece of freedom. And it's been such a game changer for my life to have books that work. I'm sure if my books had flopped, I would have said, it's okay. Like I learned a lot from writing them, but it's like, wow, it's like amazing if they do work. And like, I would love for more people to have that.
You pretty much created financial stability and location independence by producing something that produces value for you, right? It's like it's passive income. Obviously it's not passive. You still have to engage your audience, your following. And
I actually do nothing on the author platform. It's something I'm trying to change. But like my royalties now are about 14,000 a month, and I've done nothing. Like I hustled
that sounds reasonable.
A little bit for the first year when I launched it. I like worked hard to sell the first. I think I sold about 600 copies myself through like going to events and blogging and doing this and that. And after that, just nothing. And now it's sold around 100,000. So there's like a 20-to-1 leverage on like the ones I sold myself versus the ones that sold through word of mouth or organic or whatever. Yeah. I'm trying to do better. I want to build an author platform now because I'm starting to think like, I had the financial stability for like a young dude who's single, but do I have the financial stability for like for a family and for taking care of this and that? So I'm thinking a little bit bigger now, which is why I'm also motivated to build the platform and build kind of the business around it and build the, all these extra pieces that you can build on top of a book as a cornerstone.
By building in public, writing in public, and failing in public, you're learning in public, you're teaching in public, and you're succeeding in public eventually.